The year 2025 began with a chill over North America, one that had little to do with winter. In Washington, President Trump, newly re-elected, reignited his America First agenda, turning a critical eye north to Canada. The once stable relationship between the US and Canada was fracturing. Prime Minister Jagmeet Singh's government watched uneasily as Trump's rhetoric grew hostile, accusing Canada of unfair trade practices. The White House's grievances ranged from Canadian dairy policies to a new digital tax on US tech giants. Trump's message was clear: protect American workers, get tough on Canada. Ottawa tried to keep things diplomatic, but behind closed doors, officials braced for a trade war. The spirit of cooperation that defined the US-Canada relationship was fading fast. Cabinet meetings in Ottawa focused on how to respond without plunging Canada into recession. The ideological divide, Trump's nationalism versus Canada's multilateralism, made compromise nearly impossible. As spring arrived, diplomatic channels fell silent and the world waited for the first shot in a looming trade war. In June 2025, the Trump administration dropped the hammer-sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods. Steel, aluminum, lumber, auto parts, and agriculture, nothing was spared. The tariffs, announced late at night, were designed for maximum pain, targeting industries dependent on US markets. The Canadian dollar plunged, imports soared in price, and layoffs swept through factories. In Windsor, Ontario, auto supply chains collapsed. In British Columbia, sawmills shuttered. The dream of post-pandemic recovery vanished overnight. President Trump declared victory for American workers, but the reality was more complicated. US manufacturers relying on Canadian materials saw costs spike, and supply chains on both sides suffered. The pain was immediate and widespread, with thousands of jobs lost and communities thrown into crisis. American farmers and manufacturers soon felt the sting as well. The tariffs were not just numbers, they were a direct blow to livelihoods. The shockwave had been sent, but its aftershocks were only beginning. The US-Canada economic partnership, once seamless, was now fractured. The continent braced for what would come next. Canada had to respond. Doing nothing would be seen as weakness. After emergency meetings, Ottawa announced retaliatory tariffs, targeted, strategic, and designed to hit key US industries. Kentucky bourbon, Florida oranges, Wisconsin dairy, products from politically sensitive states, were all on the list. Prime Minister Singh addressed the nation, vowing not to be bullied and urging Canadians to buy local. A wave of patriotism swept the country, even as economic hardship loomed. The move was risky. Canada's economy is much smaller, and a prolonged conflict could be devastating. But the political cost of inaction was higher. Approval ratings soared as Canadians united against perceived US aggression. The North American market began to fracture, American farmers lost access to Canada, and Canadian consumers faced higher prices. The symbolic friendship bridge was now clogged with economic barriers. The dispute had escalated from disagreement to open conflict. Ottawa had drawn its line in the sand. The showdown was on. As the trade war deepened, British Columbia struck back with a unique weapon-heavy tolls on US trucks using the Alaska Highway. This vital route, Alaska's economic lifeline, was now a pressure point. The tolls, ranging from hundreds to over $1,000, targeted Alaska's supply chain. The message: if you hurt our forestry industry, we'll use geography to hit back. Unlike federal tariffs, this was a surgical strike at a specific US vulnerability. Alaska relies on the highway for nearly all goods. British Columbia was holding the state's supply chain hostage. The move was framed as road maintenance funding, but its true purpose was clear. Alaskan leaders were outraged, but the Trump administration was caught off guard. British Columbia had found a legal gray area, escalating the conflict to a new level. The rules of the game had changed. Alaska felt the impact immediately. Transportation costs soared, and the price of goods doubled almost overnight. Grocery shelves emptied, fuel prices spiked, and construction halted as materials became unaffordable. Isolated communities faced shortages of food and medicine. The economic siege was on, and ordinary Alaskans paid the price for a trade war they never started. The crisis exposed Alaska's dependence on the highway and its vulnerability. The state's leaders pleaded with Washington for relief, but solutions were elusive. The Trump administration's attempt to punish Canada had backfired, inflicting pain on its own citizens. The Alaska Highway blockade turned a distant trade dispute into a local emergency. The political fallout was immediate and severe. The cost of the trade war was now measured in empty shelves and struggling families. The trade war quickly became a national security crisis, especially in the Arctic. Alaska is America's strategic outpost in a region of growing global competition. The tolls weakened Alaska, alarming the Pentagon and undermining U.S. readiness in the high north. Russia and China watched the U.S.-Canada rift with interest, eager to exploit the vacuum. For decades, North American defense relied on U.S.-Canada cooperation. Now that partnership was in jeopardy. The Arctic, once a zone of collaboration, was becoming a new front in great power rivalry. The Alaska Highway, critical for military logistics, was now a choke point. The Pentagon faced the absurd prospect of paying a foreign government to move its own equipment. The trade war was eroding the foundations of North American security. Adversaries saw opportunity in the chaos. The stakes had never been higher. By late summer 2025, the US and Canada were locked in their worst dispute in modern history. What began as a trade spat had spiraled into economic warfare, regional blockades, and Arctic insecurity. The conflict inflicted real harm on citizens and industries, with no end in sight. For Canada, recession loomed. For the US, Alaska's crisis and Arctic instability were strategic setbacks. The world's longest undefended border was now a line of confrontation. Decades of trust and cooperation were eroding fast. Each retaliatory move deepened the spiral. The only way forward was dialogue and cooperation, a recognition that their futures were intertwined. The leaders in Washington and Ottawa faced a stark choice: rebuild bridges or let them burn. The future of North America and the Western Alliance hung in the balance.